Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm going to be working on the Ashton top by Helen's Closet, and I'm going to be working on version B, which is the shirt that I'm wearing right now actually. It's the cropped version. And what I love about this shirt is that you really can just make it out of leftover fabric. You're not going to need very much. The one that I am making today, I'm using some turquoise fabric, but then I have some leftover purple that I'm using for the hemming. So get your fabric ready, get it all cut. Don't forget to cut the notches, and then come and meet me back with all your fabric, and I'll be going through all of the steps together with you. As a reminder, I am making these videos mainly for beginning sewers, so you'll see that I'm going to be moving pretty slowly through each of the steps and modeling probably multiple times, and just trying to accommodate all types of learners. So I hope that you enjoy, and feel free to fast forward through if there's certain things obviously that you already know. And I welcome any of your feedback or advice. If you're a more advanced sewer and you like to offer some advice, I would love any tips as well. For step one, before you start putting anything together, you're going to stay stitch the front, the back, and the front and back facing. What I love about Helen's Closet is they give all of these tips. So this is a really great pattern for beginners like ourselves. Right here, the beginner tip talks about what stay stitching is and why it's important. I even stay stitch around necks, and especially if I'm doing any kind of sleeve like this, in everything that I make, even if it doesn't tell me to stay stitch. So you're going to stay stitch from the outside to the inside, and same thing all the way around. So I'm working with view B, which is like the crop version, and I'm also going to be using the facing. So in this pattern you have the option to do facings like this, or you can do binding all the way around, but I'm choosing to do this. So I just wanted to show you my pieces before I get started stay stitching. I have my back facing, front facing, and my front of the top, and I'm sorry, this is the front and this is the back. Now when you're stay stitching, if you have a really simple machine like I do, you turn it all the way to the tightest stitch, the smallest stitch. Okay, so normally I'm working here. You're gonna move it here and then stay stitch just as they tell you. I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm gonna start right here on the sleeve, and I'm just going to double check too to see, it says stay stitch 1/4 of an inch. So that's really like almost right on the edge of your fabric. I know that's kind of hard for you to see what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna talk you through that. I double check to make sure that I'm on the tightest stitch. I'm gonna stitch all the way down to the middle stop. I'm gonna go back a tiny bit and then cut the end right there, and I'm gonna do the same thing all around this side. Stop, go back, and come back again and cut. Here's what it looks like after I stay stitched. I'm gonna do my thread in a different color so you can see it. So I stopped right here in the middle, all the way to the end. Now I'm gonna do the same thing. Make sure that you start from the top and go out for your front and your back and your facing. So I'm gonna be working on that, and then I'll come back and move on to the next step. Just before I take off my tracing paper, I made sure to mark right here that this is the front. I used my marking chalk, and that this is the back. I marked it right here at the letter B because as a beginner, if I'm looking at these two pieces, I might not know right away which should be the front and which should be the back. So when I'm removing this, I noticed that the first time I made this shirt, I finished stay stitching all the way around the necklines and the arms. And I'm gonna jump ahead to a step that's a little bit later, but to me it makes sense to do it right now because I have these pieces in front of me. I'm gonna work on the finishing of this. It looks really beautiful. If you have a serger, you would serge and finish that closed. I don't have a serger, so I'm just going to use a really tight zigzag finish this. Same thing with this one. I'm gonna zigzag and finish it closed, so that way that's ready for later on when we start adding this on. So I'm just gonna do that now, and then I'm gonna start working on the front piece next. All right, it's all finished. I zigzagged it closed. That way it doesn't fray later on because this is gonna be exposed. So I should also note that because this thread is exposed, you might want to think about the color choice of thread that you use. Ideally, I probably would have used this teal color, but because we're in quarantine, I don't really shop a lot for things, so I'm just kind of using what I have, and it's fine. It's a contrasting color, so just keep that in mind that this is going to be exposed, so if you want to choose that based upon. All right, so some helpful tools that you might need for this step are something to draw and trace with on your shirt. So I'm using, I don't even know what this is. I got it at Joann's. It's some little chalk, and I just roll it and chalk powder comes out and it'll just easily wipe off. I also use that chalk to label that this is the front of my shirt because sometimes when the front and back look very similar, I get mixed up. And you'll probably need some kind of ruler. So here's my top tracing, and I'm gonna just match this back on the top. So I'm gonna fold it back the way it was when you cut it. And then I'm going to put this right back on top. And you might want to pin it just so it doesn't move around because I'm going to be tracing these darts before I sew them. So pin it in place just so it doesn't move around. And then I'm going to get my tracing tool and mark first where the apex is at. So the apex is right the point where those two lines meet together. So I just kind of move this open and find where that apex is at and just draw a little mark right there. Then I'm gonna mark down here right at the edge of the seam where these two lines are. So there's a line right here at the top, and there's a line right here at the bottom. I'm gonna mark that too. Then I can just remove my tracing paper, and I'm going to use my ruler to draw that line all the way to the apex. Now, drawing these lines is probably not necessary if you've done a lot of darts before. I've only done it a few times, so just to be safe and to make sure I'm ironing and sewing in the correct place, I like to do this just to be super sure that it fits properly. If you have a dart in the wrong place, it's gonna look really weird on your breast. So this dart for me happens to work perfectly with my body type. Some people have to do full bust adjustments and change where the dart is at. So luckily for me, I don't have to do that. So I did, okay, so I just traced it now, but I only did it on one side. So then I'm gonna flip it on the other side and do the same thing. So I'm gonna flip it this way, and I'm gonna do that step all over again. So I've drawn my lines, I've made my apex, and now I'm gonna fold, and I'm gonna match this line with this line. And when you match those lines, it should make just a tiny point like that. And then I like to use my finger to just kind of press it along the top, so it makes it a little bit easier to sew. And then I'm going to enter this into my machine and sew right along where that line is, all the way to the apex. Now, I read somewhere else in a different pattern that I made for darts to start with your normal stitch length. So in my machine, I'll show you in just a moment, but then as you get closer, tighten the stitch right around here before the apex, and don't back stitch, just leave a little bit of extra thread. So it shows you that here in step 2. You fold it, you start from the outside of the shirt and stitch inward, and then tighten that stitch length right around here, and do not back stitch, leave a little bit of trail of thread. So I'm gonna model that on my sewing machine in just a moment, but I also just wanted to note that my shirt, I know it's a little hard to tell what is the front and what is the back because they're both the same. So I just decided this is gonna be the back. So the back is gonna be where you're sewing along. So make sure you're not doing this on the front side, because then all the stitching is going to be on the front. So double check that before you sew that. Okay, so I have it here ready to go. I'm going to start on the outside of the dart, and I have my stitch set right in the middle to where I normally stitch at. I'm going to go really slow right along the line that you drew, and then I'm going to back stitch. It's stuck. I'm gonna problem solve, so this might happen to you too. I don't know, something got stuck. I'm just gonna trim that off. Not a big deal. It probably would have been a big deal if I was freaking out about this. I'm not freaking out. Okay. Here it is again. That's what I love about sewing, is you just kind of go with it, and you know, lots of weird things happen with your machine. I'm still learning how to fix this machine along the way too. So I'm going to back stitch and then just go really slow along that line that you drew. And just a little before you start getting to the apex, then you're going to switch it to a tighter stitch. I just did that now. I'm going to curve it in towards that apex and just go all the way off the fabric. Remember, don't back stitch. I'm so used to back stitching for everything else, but this you don't. And then pull it, but don't cut it too tight to the thread. Give yourself some room because you're going to tie a knot in a moment. So I'm going to snip it and give myself room. So here's what yours should look like right along that line, and I'm going to tie a teeny tiny knot right there. That wasn't so bad, right? I was really scared of sewing darts, and now I'm starting to get the hang of it. Okay, so I'm going to trim all that extra fabric off, and I tied my teeny tiny knot right there and left a little bit of thread open. So this is what it looks like. And then when you open it, ta-da! Here's the front of your shirt. The back of your shirt should look like this. Okay, so in their step 3, they're reminding you that now you're going to get your iron out and press your darts towards the hem. So that means you're going to press it down. If you have... So here's the back of my shirt. Here's the dart right here. I'm just going to pull it and make sure that everything is flat before I iron. If you don't pull it, you're not going to get a real nice crease on the opposite end. So I'm pulling it slightly, and I'm going to start on the outside and press it down. And as I'm continuing to pull And then I just kind of hold my shirt up a little bit to give it a tiny bit of a curve and press into the apex, because I don't have one of those really cool round things. I can't remember what they're called, for pressing darts and for pressing round parts of fabric. Okay. And then just flip it around and check to make sure that everything looks good. Mine looks pretty good. I don't see any weird puckering right there, so that's a good sign. And now you're gonna do the exact same thing to the other side. Go for it. Stitch together the front and back. I'm gonna do it slightly different just to save on time. So let me show you what I did on one of my seams, and I'm gonna model it on the second one too. So first you wanna make sure that your right sides are facing. So this is the right side of my shirt and this is the right side. For the back it didn't really matter, but I know that the right side is here because that's where the dart is at. So the back is on the outside, all the backs are on the outside. So instead of finishing this separately, what I'm gonna do is, so I lined up my seams and I stitched 5/8 of an inch. So on your machine, 5/8 is just one line past the halfway mark. So I stitched 5/8 of an inch, and then I graded a tiny bit of the excess fabric, and then I zigzagged it closed together. Now the only difference from what she's saying to do is when you zigzag the front and when you zigzag the back, you would open up the seams and press it. But for me, I did it together, so let me show you what that looks like. So I stitched 5/8 of an inch first, and then I trimmed the excess fabric, and you could see that I zigzag stitched both of them together, right? So I'm not gonna be able to open up and fold it open. But what I will do instead is over with my iron, I'll press this seam to the back. So it's just slightly different. Instead of pressing the seams open, I'll just be pressing it to the back. And for me, it doesn't really make that much of a difference because I'm gonna be putting on the facing anyway, and that'll cover that up. So here's what my seam looks like. I just sewed that at 5/8 of an inch, and you can see I have a lot of excess fabric. So I'm gonna trim that, which trimming for me is really the same thing as grading. Grading is taking off the excess fabric. I took off about, I don't know what that is, less than 1/2 inch. And then I'm gonna zigzag this closed so that doesn't fray. Once I zigzag it closed, I'm gonna take it over to the iron and iron my seams facing to the back of the shirt. So now we're on step 15, and it's telling you with right sides together. So the right side is white, the wrong side is like a dark gray. So sometimes I get a little confused and I forget that. And I'll just mark it just so I'm super sure. So this is the right side of the shirt and this is the wrong side. And that helps me remember before I sew anything the wrong way. And you're gonna sew those shoulders at a 5/8 seam allowance, which again is just one line over from a half mark on your sewing machine. I can show you that in a moment too. And then you're not gonna zigzag that close. It says just press the seams open. So I'm gonna get my, ooh, I've got a lot of fabric going on here. I'm gonna get, now I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh crap, is this the front or is the back? Is this the back? But remember I labeled it earlier? Oh, thank God I labeled it because it has a B, so I know this is the back. And then I'm gonna line it up with my front. And for me, again, it doesn't really matter which is right side or wrong side facing because they're the same color on the, but for you it'll probably be a lot more clear because you'll have two different color schemes if you've got like a flowery pattern or something. So I'm gonna line up my seams And I always just pin it. You don't have to, but I do it just to be safe and make sure that nothing slips. So I'm pinning that before I sew my 5/8 seam allowance, and I'm doing that to the other side as well. And I'm gonna bring you over to my sewing machine to just show you really briefly again, where is 5/8 of an inch on the sewing machine, because my sewing machine is not really labeled, maybe because it's a beginning sewing machine, but you think because it's a beginning machine they would show that, but let me just show that to you now. All right, so in the beginning of all of her directions, she said everything for seam allowance is sewed at 5/8. So right here where this circle is on mine, that's 4/8, which is the same as a half, and 5/8 is just one line over. So I'm gonna line up my fabric there. So that's half of an inch, or 4/8, and here's 5/8, just a tiny bit over. And here it is again, a little bit closer. That's 4/8, or half an inch, and this is 5/8, and that's where I'm gonna sew my seam allowance. And always double check to make sure that you're on straight stitch. I was just on zigzag mode a few minutes ago, so I just double check that before I start sewing. Okay, I took a little break. I'm back fresh, ready to finish the top today. I am on step 16. So remember, we skipped the bias tape step because we are doing facing. So you're going to lay your top and bottom that you already sewed together right side facing up, and you're gonna put your facing right here, right side facing down. So I have it labeled so I can remember too that white is the right side, and you should see the wrong side up here on the top. So here's what that looks like for mine. This is the wrong side, and the right side is in here. So I've just matched it. You're gonna match your seams first. So I'm matching the seam of the facing to the seam of the top, and pin that down, and then go on the other side, do the same thing, match those two seams together and pin it in place. And then you're gonna slowly work your way around the front, pinning all the way around. So, and careful not to pull the fabric. Pulling is, so I'm just gently gonna pin it around, and sometimes you have to unpin and kind of just shift things a little if it feels like if it's not fitting on perfectly. It just means that you need to shift things around a little, and I usually have to do that. So I'm slowly just pinning around the front, just showing what that looks like, and checking to make sure that there is no bulk anywhere, that it's flat, all the surfaces are flat. And it looks pretty good to me along the front. It actually fit without having to do any readjustments, but I might have to do adjustments when I work around the back. So then once you have that all pinned, pin all the back, and then you're gonna sew your seam allowance all the way around. And now be careful because you're not using a 5/8 seam allowance anymore, you're using a 3/8. So remember, 4/8 was at the halfway mark, 5/8 was right after that, but now you're gonna go back, and so the seam allowance is slightly smaller. Once I just finished sewing the seam allowance at 3/8 all the way around, and then one step that I forgot to show you that it says in the directions is to grade the seam. So I'm gonna get my scissors for cutting fabric and grading the seams. Again, this term keeps coming up as you're sewing, is just trimming the excess fabric. So you can see there's a lot of excess fabric here that could become bulk. So I trim it down to just before that line, and then I'm gonna get my tiny shears and just slightly, so after I trim, then I'm gonna slightly cut along just like it shows right here. You don't need to cut those tiny triangles, you just need to cut real small snips around the edge, just so it lies flat. Okay, now that I finished sewing that seam, I just changed my thread color because I know that that's something that I'm gonna see, and the other color probably would have bothered me. Now I'm going to go to step 17, where we lay the shirt out flat, and the top is wrong side facing up right now. I can tell that it's wrong side facing up because the darts look like this. And then you're gonna pull the facing through. And when you pull the facing through, you'll see that this is the right side facing up, okay? And now we're gonna iron it. So as I'm ironing it, I'm gonna make sure to iron it right at that seam, okay? Not like this, otherwise that's gonna be facing on the outside of your shirt and you don't wanna see that. So fold it in and iron all the way around. So again, on mine, I ironed it down real flat right here all the way around. So that's what we're doing right now. This is called the burrito method. So we're on step 18. And I'm gonna do this nice and slow, but I'm also, if you wanna go at a faster pace, I'm gonna put a link in the description at the bottom of someone else that you can look at who shows the burrito method. And she probably is very clear, but for me, she moved a little too fast. So first step that you're gonna do is how I have my shirt laid out is, let's see, the top of the shirt is on this side, on the left side, and the bottom of the shirt is on the right side. And then over here at the top and the bottom of my table are my shoulder seams, okay? So if you're looking at this picture, I kind of lay it like this on my table because you're really moving, for me, I'm moving this way. So the first step is that double check too to make sure that this is right side and this is wrong side. The facing is right, the shirt is wrong, okay? Now I'm gonna grab the top of my shoulder seams and I'm gonna slowly start to roll it in. Okay, now what you're doing, if I understand correctly, because my brain is still having a hard time processing exactly what we're doing, is you're trying to line up the shoulder seams so you can sew them, and then you're gonna eventually like pull it all out. And I don't even know, it's like magic. It just looks beautiful. All of the seams will be facing on the inside so nobody could see them. So here I am, I'm still rolling from the top of the shoulder seam. Now I've reached the middle of the neckline. I'm gonna keep going, and then this is about the point where I stop. It kind of looks like a rainbow at this point, and you have one shoulder seam closest to your belly that's open. The other shoulder seam has been rolled in. Okay, then you're going to, I'm gonna say this slowly so I can understand it too. You're gonna take the facing that's closest to your belly and flip it over to the other side. So instead of a rainbow, now it's an upside down rainbow. Here that is again, in case you're like me and really need time for processing, because this is really weird. You're gonna take the facing that's closest to your belly, again this is the shoulder seam, and flip it over to the other side. Upside down rainbow is what you should see right now. Okay, now that you've done that, you're gonna lift it, lift the whole shirt, and flip that shirt so it's facing all the way up on the table. Here that was again. That was a really weird move. Here it is again, one more time. So the facing was like this, right? This is the shoulder seam, it's like a rainbow. I'm gonna flip it upside down rainbow facing up on your table. And then I'm gonna lift this up. So all of this is gonna go flip right on the other side. Okay. Now, when I flip it on the other side, what I'm trying to do is match this facing with the shirt. So this facing is the shoulder, and this is the shoulder here. So you want to be careful that this little stuff right here is tucked in. That's the whole reason why we rolled it, because you don't want to accidentally sew it. So I'm matching the facing to that side seam right here. This is the right side of the shirt, and this is the right side of the facing. So I'm matching that, and I'm just gonna pin that right away so I don't get confused. And then as you move along, you're gonna match the next seam. So I'm matching this is the right side. I'm matching the right side to the right side on this side. And I'm gonna carefully pin it and tuck in the excess fabric so you don't accidentally sew that. Oh, I hope I'm doing this right. We'll find out. It's like a magic trick. No, I'm just kidding. I know for sure I'm doing it right because I've already done it 2 times. So trust the process. My friend Susan, who's a sewer, said that same thing. You just kind of have to trust the process even though it feels really weird. And then I'm gonna just pin the facing and find those notches too. Let's see if I could show you. There's a little notch right there. If you cut those notches at the very beginning when you were cutting your fabric, that will really help you right now to know for sure, oh yeah, I did line up everything right. So again, I'm still getting the shoulder seams together. Right sides are facing, wrong sides are off. I'm not done yet. Just take your time making sure that you don't accidentally get any fabric that should not be in there, because when you sew around the shoulders, you're only sewing right around the outside of that hem. So I just like to take this step really slow and allow my brain to process what I'm doing. Again, I'm marking up the notches on this side. I see 2 little notches. I'm making sure that they match up correctly. And then I'm gonna take it to the sewing machine. Let's double check what we sew it at. So we just went through all of those steps. Go back and watch it again if that was tricky. And then you're gonna sew it at 3/8 seam allowance, not 5/8. Check to make sure you're sewing it at 3/8 seam allowance. And then I'll come back and I'm gonna show you how to take it all out. Careful as you're sewing that 3/8 seam allowance that you're just making sure that that little extra fabric that's over here stays over here. So I'm being super careful, touching it with my fingers just to make sure that that bulk is inside of that burrito, that it's not coming out on the edge. And I'm more than halfway there. Take your time. You got this. Here's what it should look like once you've sewn that. And then again, before you try to pull anything out, you're going to get your fabric scissors and you're gonna grade a little bit of that excess fabric that's along the seam, grade it, and then use your trimming shears and cut little tiny notches again, because this is another curve and you want it to lay flat. Okay, y'all, this is the exciting part, or it could be really disappointing if you made a mistake. So let's be real. There was a time that I pulled this out, the first time I ever did it, and it was pretty fucked up, and it was a big disappointment. So let's just cross our fingers and hope that we did it right. Okay, so you're gonna pull slightly through the fabric that was on the inside. So now I'm pulling it outside. This is kind of where the magic happens. Keep pulling it, keep pulling it, and the moment of truth. Let's see. Yes! Ha! I'm always so nervous that I did that wrong. So I just wanted you to see my relief that thank God I taught you the right way. Okay, so here's what it looks like. Damn, this burrito method like boggles my mind every time. Okay, so you'll see now that this side of the seam is finished. Look how beautiful it looks. I mean, not completely finished, right? But you can't see any of those seams on either side. And then this side is the side we haven't worked with yet. It's still open, okay? So you still have one more to do. Can you handle this? You're gonna feel so much more confident when you do 2 sleeves. So we just did 1, now we're gonna work on this. I'm on step 20. Your shirt is gonna be the wrong side out, right side in, and you're gonna flip the facings up like this. So you're gonna get ready to stitch all the way up along both side seams. So let me show you what that looks like. So my right sides are together. This is the right, these are both right sides. They're facing together. And I'm gonna flip this outer edge of the facing up, and I'm gonna do the same thing to the back side. So they're both facing up, and I'm gonna match them and start pinning it all along the sides. And make sure to match the seams. And just line up all those sides. Pin it all the way to the bottom. So it should look something like this. It's pinned all the way on the side, and this facing is flipped up. I'm gonna do the same on the other side. Flip everything up. So this is the top of the shirt, and line everything up again. I'm not gonna do the whole thing because you don't wanna see me do that all over again, probably not. Just make sure to line up your seams. And then one thing to know is that when you sew the side seams, you're gonna go back to 5/8 of an inch. So again, that's a little bit more than 1/2 an inch. Go back to that because we were working in 3/8, so just always double check that. And when you sew, you're gonna start at the bottom and sew up. Same thing on this side. Here's what my side seams look like. It has a 5/8 seam allowance and it's zigzag closed. Again, I did it all together instead of separately and ironing it with the seams open. So for me, when I press it, I'm gonna press the seams towards the back of the shirt. So I don't really want the seams bothering me in the front. I'm gonna press them towards the back. So that's what I'll do in just a moment, but I wanna show you the final step for the side seam. So step 21 is right here, and it's showing you a picture of the outside of the shirt. You're going to line up the facing that's on the inside with that side seam, and you're gonna stitch in the ditch, which means you're just stitching right where that seam line is at, all the way up until about there, just so that the facing on the inside doesn't flip all the way around and move around on you. So let me show you what that looks like on mine. So you're going to press that down. This is what it looks like on the inside of the shirt, right? So I like to pin it. You probably don't necessarily need to pin it, but I'm just gonna pin it in place to make sure that everything is lined up. And then I haven't ironed mine, so you can see it's moving around. It'll be so much better once I iron it. But then I'm gonna prep this to line up. The facing's gonna line up with that seam line. And again, you don't have to pin it. I'm gonna pin it just to be safe and make sure it doesn't move around. And then I wanna show you what it looks like on the opposite side. So here's what it looks like on the inside. I'm lining this seam of the facing up with the seam line on my shirt. Then you would flip it inside out. I'm sorry, flip it right side out. So this is the right side of the shirt. And stitching in the ditch means that you're gonna take out your pin, of course, first. Don't sew over your pin. Don't sew over that needle. And you're gonna stitch from here all the way down till about there. That's the bottom of my facing on the inside. So you're just stitching that into place so it doesn't wobble around. Do that on this side and do it on the opposite side. And then the last step is just doing the facings for the bottom of the shirt and you're done. Okay, we're on the home stretch. Here are your two hem facings. We are on step 22. And it's saying put your right sides together. So for me, it doesn't matter. Again, I'm just using a solid fabric. For you, it might matter, so make sure you're doing right sides together. You're gonna line up both sides of the front and back hem and sew it at a 3/8 seam allowance. It doesn't say that right here, but in the beginning of the tutorial, it says if you're working with any of the hems, I'm sorry, not the hems, any of the facings, you're gonna use a 3/4 seam allowance. So I'm taking my front piece and I'm also going to just label it just for my own reference and just to be sure. I just like to be extra safe so I don't make any mistakes. I'm just labeling it really quick with an F so I know that that's gonna be the front of the hem and this is the back of the hem. And you're gonna do right sides facing. And again, for me, it doesn't really make a difference. I'm also looking for my notches. So I cut those little notches. You should have cut those little notches. And make sure those notches on both of them are facing the same way. So I have notches right here. And I'm just gonna make sure they're all facing down before I sew them. So you don't really have to pin this. I'm gonna pin it just to be safe. Pin one side, pin the other, and sew it at 3/8 seam allowance, and then you're gonna press those seams open like this. Okay, don't turn your iron off because you're gonna need it again in a moment. So I just used my iron and I pressed my seams open on both sides. Now we're on step 23. Step 23 is find the side of the hem that's not notched. So remember I told you check to make sure the notches are all facing the same way. And you're gonna fold that unnotched facing towards the wrong side at 3/8 of an inch. So on mine, now we know for sure this is the wrong side. And you're gonna fold it towards the wrong side like this at about 3/8 of an inch. That's probably about 3/8 of an inch, and it's okay if it's not perfectly 3/8 of an inch. So you're gonna fold that and press it all the way around at 3/8 of an inch. Take it slow because it's a circle, right? So I'm gonna do a little at a time. So here's what my hem looks like. This is the wrong side, and I pressed it at about 3/8 of an inch, and I made sure that the notches that I have are on the opposite side, right? Okay, now I'm moving on to the next step. I'm gonna set this aside for a second and grab my shirt. And make sure that your shirt is right side facing out. Here, my shirt looks right side facing out. The darts, this is what it looks like on the outside. And then you're gonna grab your hem and make sure you find whatever side you marked as the front. So here's my front. I'm gonna line that up with the front. I'm gonna line up the seam lines to these seam lines, and I'm just gonna bring it around the shirt. Oops, I'm sorry, I did it backwards. I'm gonna flip it the other way. Wrong way. So this pressed part that you just did should be facing top. The open seam that hasn't been folded is facing bottom. Okay, so here's what that looks like. I'm gonna bring it in a little closer. Now you're gonna pin the side seams first and match it to the side seams of the shirt. So my right sides are together right now. And I'm gonna do that again for this side. I'm matching up the side seams and pinning them together. Then you're gonna find those notches. So I have notches right here, and I'm gonna find that notch on the shirt and do the same for all the other notches. You're just trying to line them up. And if you forgot to cut the notches at the beginning, which I've done before, I've forgotten to cut the notches or just didn't notice that there were notches, that's okay too. You just want to make sure that you're evenly spreading the hem around and pinning it so that there's no excess in any weird areas. So everything should be laying flat on the opposite side. So you're gonna go ahead and pin it all the way around, finish pinning it all the way around the back, finish pinning it around the front. And then you're gonna sew the hem with a 3/8 seam allowance again. So you're sewing all along this bottom 3/8 seam allowance. I'll be back. Okay, here's what my seam looks like. I sewed it all the way around at 3/8 of an inch. Now I'm gonna get my trimming, my fabric shears, and grade the excess fabric all the way around. And because I haven't really showed you that in any of the other ones, I just wanted to show you about how much I'm trimming. About that much I'm trimming it off. So you're gonna grade that seam all the way around, and then you're gonna get your iron warmed up and ready again to press this seam and this little seam allowance right here, press it out towards the bottom. It's the same thing that we did earlier multiple times. We pressed it out away from the top. So after you're done grading, press it out, and we'll move on to tucking that in and sewing that under, and you're pretty much done. But I actually feel like it's right sides together because you want to press the seam facing up on the wrong side of the shirt. So then you pin it. So I don't know, for me, maybe it's an error or maybe I'm just not understanding it, but I'm gonna show you what I do. Okay, so right now I have right sides are together on the inside. So it's inside out right now, right? And I'm going to press that up with the iron. So I'm just gonna move over here to the iron and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so my shirt is inside out. I'm sorry, I know it's not the best angle. It's a little hard to see. And I'm gonna fold this seam up all the way around and just press it down before I pin anything. So I'm checking to make sure that this purple color that I have is not showing on the opposite side, because it's not meant to show, it's just meant to be a hem. I was thinking for a second, oh, it might look kind of cool if it was showing a little bit, but no, then that would change the whole length of the top, and I wanted the crop top. So I'm gonna iron it like this all the way around so the hem is nice and flat on this side. And okay, last and final step, here we go. You're gonna pin all the way around and make sure to line up the side seams and just make sure that everything is evenly distributed. So I usually start with my side seams and make sure that they're lined up, and they are. Pin that first, pin the other side seam, make sure it's lined up, and it is. Pin that, and then slowly work your way around and pin the rest in place. I would not try and sew this without pinning it down, because the last shirt I made, I got a little lazy and I pinned some and I didn't really pin like I should have. I just did a few, and I ended up having like this excess of fabric on one side, and then I had to redo the whole thing. So lesson learned, try not to be lazy, especially with things like this. Like, I cut corners with other things like zigzag stitching. I cut corners with that, but with something like this I wouldn't, because I know from experience now of what will happen if you're lazy. So I'm gonna pin it around, and then I think my hem is finished. Picking out the stragglers, and here's what it looks like on the right side. I guess I don't mind the contrast of color. Now you're gonna take it over to the press that down, press those seams and lock them in, and then I will show you what it looks like when it's finished. You made it to the end, or did you? Or did you just skip to the end? Here's what it looks like. I haven't tried it on yet. Here's what the inside looks like. It turned out really nice. I hope that this was helpful for you, and let me know if you were watching this and maybe you are a more experienced sewer and you have a better way of doing things. I would love to hear feedback. If you are a very beginner sewer, or you've been sewing for about a year like me, I hope that this was helpful for you. I try to go slow and just really be conscious and thinking about anyone who might have any kind of disabilities, or just struggling with reading directions. So again, if you haven't watched my introduction video, I just talk a little bit about why I'm doing this, and one of the main whys is for folks who might need more visuals and just more modeling instead of reading, because that has always been challenging for me. So I hope that your Ashton top came out like mine and you're satisfied and it fits you well If you have any questions or if there were any adjustments that you might have needed to make, let me know and I can help you, or I can direct you to people who can help you, because there is just a large community of people who are out there willing to help.